Well, we're still in Acts chapter 26. Uh, Paul has done a pretty masterful job of giving his testimony as his defense before King Agrippa. And, and Agrippa does an interesting thing. He stops Paul and says, "Hey, okay, you think you're going to make me a Christian in such a short period of time?" And then Paul responds, this is in verse 29, "Short time or long, I pray to God that not only you, but all who are listening to me today may become what I am, except for these chains." And there, Paul expresses the passion of his life and his deepest, strongest desire that all who he gets to talk to could become what he was, except for the chains. Verse 30. The king rose, and with him the governor and Bernice and those sitting with them. After they left the room, they began saying to one another, "This man is not doing anything that deserves death or imprisonment." Duh. If the world was a more even and fair place, they would have somehow, and I think he could have done this. King Agrippa could have done this with a what we would call an executive order. He could have said, "We've heard all we need to hear. This man's innocent. He should be released." But they didn't. Now, well, let's keep going. We're going to talk about that more. Verse 32, Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. Again, I have to be careful because I'm looking at this through the lens of my 21st century experience and my background and my biases in a democratic republic where when the system works well, there is the possibility for adjusting appeals. Evidently, and I have to be honest with you, I don't know whether it's because the system in first century Rome was built this way, or whether Felix just didn't want to take the heat, or Agrippa. Well, let's look at it this way. If Paul had been released because of the clearly apparent fact that none of the charges brought against him were truly valid, he would have been free to make his way wherever he wanted to. God had told him he was going to Rome to take his mission and message there. I think Paul would have figured out a way to get to Rome. It would have been a long journey. Just look at a map. He was in Caesarea, which is north of Jerusalem, but still in that part of the world. And Rome was a very long journey away. Had he gone by land, it would have taken months, no doubt, and would have had many dangers and challenges and difficulties. Had he gone by sea, it would have been quite a bit more expensive. So there's that aspect of if Paul had been released, then it would have been on Paul's dime to get to Rome, which had become one of his prime directives from God himself. By remaining a ward of the court in this sense, he then got to Rome on Rome's dime. I don't know whether that's exactly why. There's this other possibility, and I think it is, it's not one thing, but you got to factor this in. And now, we're quickly going to go to the deep end of the philosophical pool. And I blame C.S. Lewis for this. I'm rereading the most difficult book I've read of C.S. Lewis's, and one of the most difficult books I've ever read. The title is The Problem of Pain. And in that book, Lewis points to the fact that our problem with pain is a very complex thing. It's not like, well, here is the deal right here. No, it's like, it's kind of like the Mississippi River that's got lots of tributaries feeding into it. And one of the tributaries is the fact that for God to have given us free will, he had to leave the possibility open that our free will and the free will of others would cause us pain. By leaving us free to choose our direction and behaviors, we expose ourselves to the possibility of suffering and pain. Now, I think maybe if you fold this thing on free will into the fact that God's intention was for Paul to get to Rome, fold those two things together here in the last of Acts chapter 26. God left Agrippa, Festus, before him Felix, with free will to either release Paul or send him on as a prisoner to Rome. It was their free will. I think one of the factors, you saw this when Felix left Caesarea and left Paul in prison there to placate or somehow please the Jews. That was his choice. He didn't have to do that, but he did. His free will. Now, Agrippa and Festus together in agreement, Paul didn't need to, he shouldn't be. Not only did he not need to be, but he shouldn't be a prisoner. He could have been set free, except he had appealed to Caesar. Well, that appeal was no longer necessary. If he had been released, he wouldn't have been a prisoner. There would have been no need for this appeal to Caesar. Well, I don't know. I wonder, and I know I tend to be a little goofy on this stuff, but I think that Agrippa and Festus were both they felt this need to hide behind Paul's appeal to Caesar in order to placate the Jews. I know I'm reading their darkest motive into this, but there you go. Okay. Well, see, I don't think we don't get any indication from Luke what Paul felt. Number one, Paul was not privy that we know of. He was not privy to this conversation between Agrippa and Festus. He may have not even known. Luke did. First of all, I can attribute the fact that Luke knew to the Holy Spirit, who inspired him, instructed him, guided him to write the book of Acts. And when we look at verse 1 of chapter 27, I get at least another possibility. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, whoa, pause. It's a we section. If we were going to sail for Italy, that would have meant that Luke was there. There's a real possibility that Luke overheard Agrippa and Festus because he was an eyewitness. He doesn't say so, but there's an inference. Okay. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. Now, the imperial regiment was no small deal. And it wasn't like, okay, I'm volunteering for the imperial regiment. Maybe, but more likely, you were assigned because of what you demonstrated of your loyalty, your what's the word I'm looking for? Capabilities. I have a friend who was a Marine and was in the presidential detail. Now, you don't get on the presidential detail because you just want to be, because you just think it'd be cool. Had to go through a very complicated process in order to be assigned to the presidential detail. Something not very dissimilar would have happened in a first century context for Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. On one level, Julius had been entrusted with Paul and some other prisoners. It wasn't just Paul. There were other prisoners that were being taken to Rome. We don't know anything about their backstory. Would have been fun to know, but the journey begins here. For Paul and Luke, we don't even know. Maybe we'll figure it out as we move forward, but at this point, we only know that Luke was with Paul. Seems likely that there were others with him, because that's usually how Paul rolled. But you got to remember, Paul had been in prison in Caesarea for 2 years. Now, for Luke to hang around for 2 years, that's a pretty big deal. We don't even know that Luke was there at the beginning of his imprisonment, but he could have been. Well, should have, could have, would have. We're going to pick it up here at verse 2 when we get together next time on So Care for Stevie Boy.